tell, Alan, that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Oh, I figured we'd start off this broadcast kind of going into Department of Justice. If you've been hiding under a rock, you might not know, who's up there trying to make moves. But we have Jeff Sessions. And I got two interesting articles here. I'll dive into one from Reason.com, another one from the Libertarian Republic. And then I also have a Ron Paul Liberty report where he kind of goes into this, but really kind of gets into all of what Jeff Sessions wants to do. We'll dive into this one from Reason.com first. This one, Justice Department rolls out new policy to seize more money under asset forfeiture. The Justice Department, rolling back on Obama-era directive, will seize more cash and property from suspected criminals, whether or not they have been charged with a crime. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said Wednesday. At a televised meeting with law enforcement leaders from around the country, Sessions laid out a new policy directive regarding the Justice Department's equitable sharing program, which distributes hundreds of millions of dollars a year in asset forfeiture revenue to state and local police departments. So, okay, let's take that part. A televised meeting with law enforcement leaders. So, you want to do this because they want it. Well, why do they want it? Well, who doesn't want more money and more toys? But does that make it right? Stealing from one person to give to other people is not doing your job. If anything, it's actually countering the job that you are supposed to be doing. So he wants to continue this. And the Justice Department's equitable sharing program, which is completely a self-serving in both, the Justice Department and the local law enforcement. It encourages them to, seize more, basically. More money you can seize without a trial, more you'll get. It says here, quote, President Trump has directed this Department of Justice to reduce crime in this country, and we will use every lawful tool that we have to do that, Sessions said. Well, that's not really lawful because it is unconstitutional. You must be charged with a crime. You must be convicted of a crime before things are supposed to be taken away from you. But we also know that, there's always been, that fine line that they love to cross and try to move that line. And they've done that. Asset forfeiture should never be lawful. It's can't be lawful if authority, governmental authority derives itself from the Constitution. That means you have to follow that Constitution. Otherwise, you make it null and void, which then makes your authority null and void. That needs to be taught more. Says, quote, we will continue to encourage civil asset forfeiture whenever appropriate in order to hit organized crime in the wallet. But we see that it goes way beyond. The encouragement has encouraged it to go beyond actual, organized crime. And again, it still doesn't, if this is organized crime, you charge them, you convict them, then you take the property. You don't take the property, and most of the time, never charge these people. A lot of people have had money taken from them. Well, you got a lot of money of cash there, Oh, you got $2,000 in cash, that must be because you're probably a drug dealer. What drugs? Well, you sold them all. That's how you got that 2,000. No, I worked. Well, I don't believe it. They, asset forfeiture. Says civil asset forfeiture is a controversial practice that allows police to seize cash and property suspected of being connected to criminal activity. The property owner does not have to be convicted or even charged with a crime to have his or her property seized and forfeited by the government. Under the Equitable Sharing Program, federal authorities may adopt state and local forfeiture cases and prosecute them at the federal level. Those local police departments get to keep up to 80% of the forfeiture revenue, while the rest goes into the equitable sharing pool and is distributed among partner departments around the country. The new policy lifts restrictions put in place by former Attorney General Eric Holder in 2015 that limited the federal authorities could adopt forfeiture cases. And, this is where that catch-22 comes in, is because, the way the Obama administration, the things that Eric Holder has said in the past, him putting this in place almost makes me, want to make sure, it makes me believe that they want to make sure that they can organize these community, organizations, which I almost wonder if they're not, these authoritarian, think tanks and organizations that they're hell-bent on establishing a communist country and overthrowing the Constitution and the rights of people, whether it's in the Constitution or not, the natural rights of people. And the benefit from that is it also, took some of the pressure off the people that were being harassed by asset forfeiture, which there's been multiple cases where people just, well, you have too much money on you, and we're going to take it. We're going to seize that money because we believe it might be drug money. And they don't, some of that pressure is taken off the everyday person. But then again, it allows, some of these groups to be able to continue to finance and make it harder for that to happen, which not too hard because Jeff Sessions has lifted those. It says here law enforcement groups say asset forfeiture is a vital tool to combat drug trafficking and other organized crime. And they argue the equitable sharing program provides essential funding for police equipment. The body armor used by police at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, one attendee at Wednesday's meeting noted, was bought using equitable sharing funds. However, asset forfeiture opponents say the program allows police departments to skirt stricter state laws surrounding asset forfeiture by having their cases moved to federal level. And while police should be well funded, they argue that money shouldn't come from property seizures that aren't accompanied by criminal convictions and due process protections. A 2014 Washington Post investigative series found that police raked in $2.5 billion since 9/11 in cash seizures during highway traffic stops, all of them without warrants or accompanying indictments. So $2.5 billion since 2011 has been seized without warrants just from highway traffic stops. And that was in 2014. In one notorious case, Oklahoma police seized more than $50,000 from a touring Christian rock band from Burma on suspicion that their money was connected to drugs. More than 20 states have passed some form of civil asset forfeiture reform in recent years, and incidents like those have also led to federal reform efforts by a bipartisan group of civil liberties organizations and lawmakers in Congress. The Fifth Amendment protects us from the government depriving us of our property without due process of law, Senator Rand Paul says in a statement to Reason. I oppose the government overstepping its boundaries by assuming a suspect's guilt and seizing their property before they have their day in court. Earlier this week, responding to Sessions' preview of the upcoming policy directives, Senator Mike Lee urged the Justice Department to consider the constitutional concerns raised by the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas in his notable dissent in an asset forfeiture case this June. The Justice Department did include several requirements that it says will safeguard the due process rights of property owners. The directives require state and local police to provide additional information showing probable cause that a crime occurred before federal authorities will adopt a seizure. Seizures of under 10,000 will have to be accompanied by a warrant, a related arrest, or the seizure of contraband. Absent those provisions, a U.S. attorney would have to sign off on an adoption. Law enforcement leaders applauded the decision. Quote, next to putting cartel leaders in the penitentiary, asset forfeiture is the strongest tool law enforcement has to hurt the drug cartels and asset law enforcement, or assist law enforcement in the fight against illegal drugs. National Sheriff's Association President Harold Everson said in a statement. You can read the rest of that article at reason.com. So you have that coming from the Justice Department, and we'll kind of cover a little bit more of that. But here's one from Libertarian, the libertarianrepublic.com. Conservative group slam misguided bill allowing Sessions to criminalize more drugs. Four conservative groups are calling for the dismissal of Republican-led law expanding Attorney General Jeff Sessions' power to set criminal drug penalties, according to a letter that the Daily Caller News Foundation obtained Tuesday. The bill, H.R. 2851, seeks to stop the importation and trafficking of synthetic drugs, dangerous alternatives to cocaine, LSD, and other street drugs. Advocates of the bill argue that stricter sentencing is the most effective means of reducing drug use, but the conservative groups that signed Tuesday's letter call for expanding treatment programs and focusing on the international drug trade. Quote, harsh penalties do not deter people with substance use disorders from using drugs. People use drugs because they have a chemical dependence and often feel that they will not be caught. The letter reads, believing that harsh penalties will deter drug use misunderstands addiction. Since the 1980s, we have had tough penalties for heroin use and distribution, yet heroin consumption has actually increased. The letter is signed by representatives from Freedom Works, American Conservative Union Foundation, Generation Opportunity, and Taxpayers Protection Alliance. Under the law, Sessions finds that banning a substance would prevent its abuse. He will be allowed to issue a temporary order adding it to Schedule A list of illegal substances, so long as the drug's chemical makeup is substantially similar to that of a substance already on the list. While the conservative groups argue the power misunderstands addiction, Republican Representative John Katko of New York, who introduced the bill, argues that the powers granted to the AG are essential because the Schedule A list needs to be able to adapt quickly to the development of synthetic drugs. But that doesn't mean that stricter penalties will help anything. And by putting more on you'll just you need you can read the rest of that at the Libertarian Republic. You need to understand that turning people into criminals doesn't fix the problem. It's just making, these private prisons rich has nothing to do with actual keeping someone off drugs, getting someone off drugs, preventing none of that. If anything, it makes them have a PhD in drug use and ability to get drugs and all that when they go into these prisons. I want to dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. Jeff Sessions declares war on liberty. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Today, I want to visit with you and talk about a speech that Jeff Sessions gave yesterday to the National District Attorneys Association, which is rather outrageous when you think about it. But we shouldn't be totally surprised because we knew he was a war hawk on drug, very dedicated drug warrior.
Yeah.
And total disrespect for civil liberties. And to me, it's sort of sad because if anything, if you were looking for the most positive thing that happened in the Obama administration, it might be the fact that he was against these mandatory sentences and changing our attitude toward war on drugs. And there was a bipartisan coalition and some legislation that they were trying to put together. It's all been canceled out with the new administration. But to me, it's also discouraging because generally speaking, we've looked for the things that we can champion in the new administration, but every day I get a little bit more discouraged because when I look at economic matters, we find that Gary Cohn and Mnuchin, are in charge, and we have a lot of protectionism going on, and spending's going up, and taxes haven't gone down yet, and on and on. The stock market's doing great. But anyway, there's still a lot of questions in the economy and questions about the Federal Reserve. But also on foreign policy, I can't get too excited. Matter of fact, I get annoyed because I was more hopeful on that. And when you look at what Mattis and Tillerson's doing, the plan is spend massively new money, even though we spend more than everybody else put together, more troops overseas, more conflict, and more confrontation with Russia. So that's not very encouraging. But here we come along with the protection of liberties. We're in a perpetual war around the world. Most people see it, 17 years in Afghanistan and the Middle East. But I believe every time you go to war overseas, it can't help but the attitude will, spill over in the war of it being against the American people, even if it's just paying for these wars overseas. But this this war on drugs is a direct confrontation to the liberties of American people, and it's something, unfortunately, or realistically speaking, it was started by a Republican. You know, it was tough on crime, Richard Nixon. Yeah, tough on crime, Richard Nixon, but he had a few problems with, following the rules too. Yeah. So the same way here, they want to be tough on crime, but I would like to figure out what we can suggest to make them understand that being tough on crime might include, a token effort to obey the Constitution. That might be something for them to worth thinking about.
Here's a funny quote in Sessions' speech. This is full generations after Nixon's war on drugs was declared. I'm convinced this is a winnable war. 40 years. But the only other thing, just taking apart some of the stuff he said, the other thing that's interesting is he really looks like he's going to be cracking down on doctors and even pretending to be the Surgeon General. He said, this nation is prescribing and consuming far too many painkillers.
No, and I've seen that happen in medicine. I've seen where nurses and doctors get terrified and they meticulously prevent people dying with cancer. It happened actually in our family. And the nurses were afraid to give the medication. And it was all this hysteria over the drugs because, if you give too much, you might lose your license. So it's the interference that is the big deal. Not only interference in, they shouldn't even be involved in medical care. But what about the interference with, there are crimes and difficulties in the sale of all products. There's a lot of fraud. Alcohol causes a lot of problems. But generally speaking, this was supposed to be a state issue, dealing with criminals and law and order and safety. That was a local issue. But there is no respect, no concern whatsoever. They want to militarize the whole thing. And that, of course, is why many police forces are over-militarized, even though they're quite a few trying to do the best they can, but also they're trying to enforce laws that shouldn't even be there. They should be ignoring this. They didn't learn one single thing about the tragic consequences of the prohibition of alcohol, and they just totally ignore it. And these drug warriors, I'd like to ask them if they drink wine, because if they are, they're total hypocrites if they do, because alcohol, I understand alcohol kills 88,000 a year. Drugs are horrible, and they kill 55,000. A horrible mess, but a lot less. And then smoking, of course, is the worst thing. But they don't think they're going to stop all that. All you do is create the black market, and they're trying to solve a problem. It reminds me of terrorism. We have to kill the terrorists. Well, why are they terrorists? They're sick and tired of us bombing them. So we have these druggies here committing vicious crimes and doing all kind of things. So what we want to do is create more of them by making everything illegal and creating a black market and making it very lucrative. So the more we attack them, the worse the problem gets, and then just goes on and on. We fill up not only the courts, the criminal justice system goes to pot, but then we fill up the prisons too. And then they wonder, where's all the money going?
I was going to ask you to put on your doctor's hat and react to this thing that he said. He says the DEA should, quote, make visits to physicians and pharmacies and do checks on those who prescribe or sell these drugs.
Unfortunately, they already do it, and it's more sinister. They don't march in with a pen and paper. Every doctor now in the system, if some of my kids are in medicine now, but if they're remote and they have their cell phone and their pad, they can talk to a patient and they can call in a prescription, and it's recorded and it's delivered to the insurance company, to the government. All of it is available already, and he's just going to, use that more in saying that they're going to crack down on the doctors. And, of course, there are going to be doctors that are going to abuse things, but that's not the problem. Because if there's 100 doctors, seeming to prescribe too much, maybe one of them is doing it on the side to make a bundle, but the other 99 might be trying to help their patients. Then you have these mischief makers, these bureaucrats, these people who want to enforce the law coming in and dictating medical practice. And subtly, it can affect medical practice by people wanting terrified. I don't want them knocking on my door. Oh, we caught you now, and they come marching in. They're terrified of that. And nurses are intimidated. Oh, well, patient may be dying of cancer, and they may be three. Oh no, the doctor ordered 4 hours. And then even if you get the doctor's order, the nurses sometimes are hesitant because if the patient is very sick and you give them an injection and the patient happens to die for other reasons, I mean, he can lose their license, all kinds of problems. And it's the subtleness, too, of the interference, in the practice of medicine. So that is a combination. And a lot of doctors are very, very much aware of it, very concerned. It inhibits the caretaking of terminal patients.
It's terrible. And he lashed out at violent crime. The cities are full of violent crime. We've got to crack down on illegal guns. But he never puts two and two together and realizes that the rise in violent crime has to do with the drug war. And there's a little stat that I dug up. After the 21st Amendment was passed, ending prohibition in 1933, homicides in the country diminished for 11 years straight. The violence, the killing, and everything, once they got rid of that stupid law, it stopped.
Yeah, and that's what would happen here. I mean, even the states now that have legalized marijuana, the crime rate has gone down.
Yeah.
But Sessions wants to reverse that. He wants to charge in and say the federal government is superior. So this is a situation which, in a way, it can be very educational. Do the states have a right to nullify federal law? And the founders believed that. It was the state should have a final decision on this. This was a further protection against an intrusive federal government. But of course, not too many follow that anymore, and that's the problem. And Obama was making an effort, but now they're coming down with a heavy hand of government. And an indication of which way we're going should be, not only at the president up here and who he's appointing, so he's responsible for this guy. But who does this guy pick? A guy named Stephen Kahn, or what was it? He was a vicious drug warrior prosecutor, and he's going to be the top dog on this. So it's Stephen Cook is his name. Yeah. But he has a reputation. He was a prosecutor for 30 years, and the prosecutors know they're in charge. They're in charge of the justice system, because what they do, if they get somebody that has this kind of a charge, they blow up the charges this big, and they're not the most reputable people. They're vulnerable, and the attorneys can't win these cases, so they plea bargain. And I love the idea of jury nullification, and it's still available to us. But a lot of times these things don't even get to the jury because there's always a deal made, and they say, "We can't help you. You're the potential criminal, and we can't get you off. So you better plea bargain because you're going to get 30 years instead of 10. You plea bargain, maybe they'll give you 5 years," and they do that, and then the prisons get filled up, and that's what's happened. That's why we have more prisoners because of the drug war than any other single country in the world.
I think it's something like, isn't it less than 10% go to trial of these cases?
Yeah, so we don't really have a Department of Justice. It's a Department of Injustice, and it's a lot of intimidation that goes on. The worst kind of people to be in charge of this are the prosecutors, because they feel like they're God. And, the saying that really epitomizes this, that tells you how much power they have, they said a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich because you have no way to answer them. They march in there, and they have a grand jury, and they tell them this, and this guy is a monster. And the grand juries are handpicked, and they roll over, and you can't answer back to them. And once you've been indicted, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough in this system. But sometimes they do the punishment. Not only these mandatory sentences are usually life sentences, and they're very often non-violent. But what about the taking of assets? Yeah. I mean, this is so horrible too. That's something that's keeps getting worse.
And he said there's a new directive coming to increase the federal government's use of civil asset forfeiture. And I found a nice quote from Reason magazine that explains why this is such a scam. between the federal government and state and locals. Justice Department plays a huge role in asset forfeiture through its equitable sharing program, which allows state and local police to have their forfeiture cases adopted by the federal government. So the feds take over the case, the seized money is put into a pool, and then in return, the department gets up to 80% of those funds back. Equitable sharing program distributes hundreds of millions of dollars a year to police departments around the country.
The only thing that's equitable about this is the so-called equitable distribution of stolen wealth. Because they don't, the assets taken, an individual doesn't have to be proven of anything.
Or even charged.
No, they don't even have to be charged. They can come in if somebody's in your automobile and you didn't know it, and they're in the back seat and they have drugs, they have, and theoretically, can just take the car. The car committed the crime. And it's almost impossible to get it back again. And a lot of them, and I think you mentioned the number, $3 billion here in the last 10 years of asset forfeitures. So it's a big time thing, and police, it circumvents because they actually get given this. This doesn't go through the appropriation process.
They get the goodies.
So do they have a motivation to seize property? And then that opens up the door for corruption within the police departments too. Are they saints? Yeah. If they seize a bundle of money and there's $10,000 there and they turn it in and there's only $8,000, I wonder if that ever could happen. No. So
here's a stat that I'm sure a lot of people have seen, but it astonishes me every time I read it. In 2014, for the first time ever, the U.S. government seized more property from Americans than burglars did.
Oh, wow.
So they're doing even better than the crooks that they're supposed to be out catching.
When Sessions finished his speech the other day, he concluded by praising all the prosecutors and the district attorneys is that for their noble work. And I got to thinking, noble, there's so much nobility in government. I think somebody at one time talked about the noble lie.
Yeah.
And that's what this is, noble work based on a noble lie, that they're going to make the world safe from drinking alcohol. And of course, they're not working on that. But if anybody even verges on the slightest bit of consistency, they would have to be taken back to the teens and arguing for the prohibition of alcohol. And more or less, most people say, no. And the other thing that happened in prohibition of alcohol, because it's illegal, the more concentrated and powerful it is, the better, because you have to transport it and hide it. That's what's happening to the drugs. The other day, even in our local area here, somebody died from synthetic marijuana. Why would anybody die from synthetic marijuana? I mean, he has to be a little bit deranged, but it's the laws that do this. Maybe if weeds were allowed to be grown in his backyard, he wouldn't go out mixing chemicals, trying to imitate this thing, this whole mess that the government created. But this is drugs that we're talking about. But really, the subject is, who should protect us from taking any risk? This is a risk. You eat too much, you drink too much, you take too many drugs, you get killed by automobiles. Everything is a risk. And it's in the proposal of medical care and insurance. Everything is risk. Nobody assumes that they're responsible for their own risk, that the government will take care of. So these guys think that I am a noble servant. People don't know how to protect themselves against risk, and I will take care of them. And they create this thing, and I imagine they can't be this vile. They have to be just stupid, to say that I'm going to take care of people and protect them against themselves. If you carry this over, how do you protect people against themselves? The two things that probably has driven a lot of violence throughout history, and that has been the distortion of religion and the distortion of philosophy. I mean, do you think Hitler just pops out of the clear blue? No. Or does Stalin pop out of the clear blue? Or was there a Lenin? It's that theory behind there. So that is, if you do this physically and wants to make us better person and healthier people, it always leads to controlling what we read. And look at what they do in our schools, not only our university, grade school, the intimidation, the indoctrination, it's just horrible. So the message is, what we need is not more Jeff Sessions. We need more liberty, and I don't know what your opinion is of what we should do here, but
you know, as I was reading this whole thing, the one thing that struck me is, where is the opposition party? This is an authoritarian manifesto, the speech was. Where is the opposition party? Where is the Democratic Party fighting for our civil liberties, fighting against this overreach? They're obsessed with Russiagate. They're obsessed with whether Don Jr. met with this guy or that guy. This is what they should be doing, and I think they're going to suffer at the polls unless they wake up and realize what their role should be.
Yeah, and I think there's way too much bipartisanship, and sometimes, as much as they fight, I think they get together and they do this fighting because they don't want to deal with the war overseas, the war against the American people, the war against our privacy. The founders thought this through, and they always assumed the federal government would get too big, and that's why they wanted states to be independent states, and if the federal government got overbearing, that they could nullify these laws and rule them out of order and not follow them. Well, that hasn't worked very well. And then, of course, they also believe strongly in jury nullification. If the federal government, all the way from the Congress up to the president and the courts, if they fail to protect our liberties, the people are supposed to protect them. But the big problem there right now is the judicial system is so corrupt, they don't even allow many of these cases to get to court. But jury nullification shouldn't be dead. Many years ago, I did a video on this in my foundation, and it goes over this subject, but there's very few people who talk about it and understand it. But ultimately, people ought to read and understand what jury nullification is. Occasionally, we hear a story about somebody being, holding out and getting somebody off, from a crime that they shouldn't have been charged with. So that is an answer. So it's one thing that we should do. But ultimately, it's the respect for liberty and the understanding of the Constitution. These people are preaching law and order. I'd like them to do one thing: follow the law and order when they take their oath of office to follow the Constitution. That would be a big help to all of us. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Again, Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, the kind of what they were talking about when it comes to the drug use and all that, we kind of covered a little bit of it, that, higher crimes has not reduced or stopped. If anything, it's increased. Well, now that we've had marijuana legalized in multiple states where they've nullified, federal law within their state, we've seen that marijuana, even in the states that have not legalized it, in society, it has become, something that is no longer looked down on the way it used to be. And I have another one from the Libertarian Republic here, and it's youth marijuana use fell by 17% over past decades, study finds. Says here, marijuana legalization is not igniting a smoking crisis among young Americans, according to a study showing steady declines in youth pot use over more than a decade. Researchers at the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse and Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration investigated how often kids aged 12 to 17 used weed between 2002 and 2014. The study, published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, revealed that the prevalence of past year marijuana use for the youth dropped 17% over the recorded period, normal reported Tuesday. The researchers also found a 25% decline in the prevalence of youth abusing marijuana, which they refer to as problematic cannabis use. Quote, in the United States compared to 2002, even after adjusting for I can't even speak today, covariates, Cannabis use decreased among youth during 2005 to 2014, and cannabis use disorder declined among youth cannabis users. The authors concluded, quote, associations between declines in tobacco use and the decreased cannabis use suggest the importance of tobacco use control and prevention among youth. The author says the findings are in line with previous studies showing that youth marijuana use is not increasing in correlation with the expanding legalization laws. Marijuana accessibility is at a record low for 8th and 10th graders and has stayed roughly stagnant among students in 12th grade. According to the annual Monitoring the Future survey, marijuana use fell slightly among 8th and 10th graders while remaining the same for high school seniors in 2016. Many health experts tied to the Monitoring the Future survey also believe that the drop in youth cannabis use can be attributed to the overall decline in the youth smoking rate. Only 1.8% of the high school seniors said they smoked half a pack or more a day in 2016, down from 11% in 1991. Members of the marijuana industry also argue that state legalization laws are helping make the product more difficult to obtain by placing it under the regulatory purview of state governments. Only, I need to add, that's probably only in the states that aren't heavily overcharging for their marijuana or taxing their marijuana. I think it's Colorado that still has quite a bit of underground, even legalized stuff that ends up underground, but that's usually only like what they consider top shelf. But lower grade stuff is still being brought in more illegally than legally. So that's what's going to fall in the real young youth's hand is more of the underground stuff, the black market, buy, a crap load of it for a very cheap price. Medical marijuana is legal in 29 states and Washington, D.C., where it is also legal for recreational use. Voters in Maine, Nevada, California, and Massachusetts all approved measures to legalize marijuana for recreational use on Election Day, joining 5 other states. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans now have access to legal pot. So, what we actually see is the decline in the use. Now, the increase in the use of a substance after it's become illegal has been evident, whether it's been alcohol, whether it's been even when they, started raising the age limit, creating an age limit and raising the age limit for cigarettes. You have people going, well, you don't want me to do it, I'll do it. Or it's bad for me to do it, let me try it. By normalizing something, it's not an attractant for someone that might be in a phase of rebellion, which you find in the youth. There's a period of time that the youth goes through a rebellious. And when you legalize something, it's not so rebellious. Now, I understand there's still going to be age laws and all that, but, it does not stop. If anything, it highlights that product or that, substance. And you can sit there and outlaw it, and what you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of people doing something that at one time was fine for them to do, but now that it's not fine, they're doing it underground, irresponsible, and not knowing exactly what they're doing. Because just like prohibition of alcohol, you had contaminated, black market liquor. And then on top of that, the government started contaminating that. So now you're harming people. And then you have cops that go and raid these establishments. So now you harm people, criminalize people, all because you made a substance illegal, which drew people to it. And, this has been pointed out for years. And through states finally nullifying marijuana laws, it's being proven again. Okay, we are going to move along here away from Jeff Sessions. We don't like Jeff Sessions here. Not saying that he might be evil, but misinformed maybe. If you're not evil, you're misinformed. Either way, you're getting it wrong. Okay. I need to get to this one. If I can find it here. Sorry, I'm trying to get it up here. Should have shut that window down. I knew it would kind of come back to bite me in the butt. Okay. I think I got it now. Okay. I got one from Stefan Molyneux. And this one is titled The End of Diversity. Prepare yourselves. I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I do want to cover some of this. And I got some articles that will go along kind of with some of what's been discussed in this clip. We'll go ahead and dive into this real quick, and we'll cover these articles. So here we go.
Levels of social unrest associated with alien elements of our societies and immigration being closely tied to the expansion of state power, do you think that liberty can realistically be achieved without first restoring homogeneity? Once the question has been read, I will be happy to expand upon my premise, referencing countries that have historically collapsed or faced balkanization as a result of demographic conflict, as well as some of the reasons why I believe that immigration specifically facilitates expansion of the state's control over the population. That's from Jordan.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Steph. It's great to finally get to talk to you. I've been a really big fan for years.
Well, let's hope I don't blow it then. destroy any positive impact you have from the show. So do you want to talk a little bit, for those who aren't aware, it's not like this is taught in government schools a lot, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the countries that that you want to reference?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. First off, I just want to say that after the Manchester terrorist attack was when I decided that I finally had to call in and speak up about this. Living in the UK, we don't get the option to talk about this publicly.
Right.
So thankfully, you offer the call-in show. It's been a fantastic utility to people like me. So I've written down quite a few examples of countries that have collapsed and been separated into separate states along ethnic lines or religious lines. You have Pakistan that's separated from India in 1947 due primarily to their religious differences, where the Muslims and Hindus were unable to live peacefully side by side. And then further, the Bangladesh Liberation War was fought then in 1971, where the cultural and linguistic differences between the Bengalis and the Pakistanis outweighed any religious unity between those two Muslim regions. Is Czechoslovakia in Europe in 1993. The country obviously split in half. You had the ethnic Czechs and the Slovaks living under one state, which was previously communist. But the Czechs were much more influential in the communist government, and the Slovaks were very resentful of that. They separated into what we have today, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Yugoslavia broke up into a whole mess of different countries over the Yugoslav wars fought between 1991 and 2001 into Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Kosovo. And the theme amongst all of these countries is that it was either ethnic groups or religious groups that separated apart and balkanized the country and went and lived in their own areas under their own governments. And the list goes on, but I think you're getting the point now.
Right. Is there more you wanted to add before I sort of weigh in with this challenging question?
Yeah, well, what made me first sort of realize this, I was reading 18th century conservative writer Edmund Burke, and he said, society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere. And the less of it there is within, the more of it there must be without. And these restraints then come from within when a population shares cultural and moral values, but when they don't, external force has to be provided to impose those restraints. So what that means then is if you want freedom on a stable political basis, you have to have, or this implies, if it's given to be true, that you have to have a homogenous culture and society composed of people who share the same values and actually want to live together, and they don't want to hurt each other. If you have people with conflicting cultures and values and traditions, then those people can only be held together by the force of a increasingly authoritarian state.
Well, as is the case in many countries in the Middle East and in Africa and so on, where you have a population that is unable or unwilling to restrain themselves according to universal principles, then you're going to end up with increasingly authoritarian regimes. And of course, as multiculturalism has grown, so has the state grown in the West. I don't think these two things are unrelated. I'm not saying they're exactly causal, but they're certainly coincidental.
Yeah, of course. What I said in my question as well, I added onto the bottom of it, why I think that governments in the West may actually be using immigration specifically to facilitate expansion of their own state power. And this is evidenced by the fact that they aren't actually taking measures that we know will prevent things like terrorist attacks taking place in the future. Instead, they impose things like the Patriot Act, or Theresa May in the UK is now proposing sweeping new internet regulations here, massive spying on our own British citizens as a result of a few terrorist attacks taking place. So the reason why I think they aren't, preventing immigration into the country, which we know from countries like Poland, which have no terrorist attacks because they don't have a Muslim population, is 100% effective, more or less, at preventing terrorism. People in government who I think have a innate desire to expand their own power can do so by importing alien elements, which they know will reliably cause social unrest, and then the government can then step in, expand their own power under the grounds of keeping the peace.
Right. I think that they are profiting, in terms state power is profiting from a divided culture, but I don't know that it's fundamentally due to that because the policies were put in place. Well, I guess they're just about as old as I am, right? In the mid-1960s. In the mid-1960s was when the decision was made throughout the Western world, and it was driven by the leftists. It was driven by the liberals. It was driven by the Labour and by the Democrats and so on to bring the third world into the West, to switch, I mean, in particular in America, to switch immigration from white Europeans to, well, everyone but. And so that, it wasn't like the current crop of politicians is just attempting to ride that wave. And sure, they can use terrorist attacks and so on to expand their own power, but fundamentally it was all put in place, I mean, before some of these politicians were even born. So I think laying that at their feet may be a bit.
Right.
But I will say this, and this is an analogy, which I know is not an argument, but imagine you own a sporting goods store. And you're in a Sopranos episode. And you get in deep, because you've got a gambling problem, you get in deep with the mob. And man, the mob, the mafia, you got to pay these guys. Like you owe them $150,000 or $200,000. Like you're just not going to be able to pay them with the money that you have. And let's say you're married and you can't hoover up that amount of money out of the family account to pay off. And you can't take a loan out on your business because your wife's got a co-sign, whatever. Like you're stuck. You're stuck. And let's say you're so worried and you're so nervous and you're so anxious that you're not being good at managing your store. It falls into disrepair. You don't order new replacements for your sporting goods, and people stop coming to your store. So, and of course, the mafia is charging more and more interest on you, and guys are starting to circle you with baseball bats, and things are looking pretty hopeless in terms of you being able to pay off your bills and continue. Well, what out do some people have in that situation? What do?
There's not much they can do.
Sure, there's something they can do. You know what they can do? They can burn down their store.
I guess that's right.
They can burn down their store, they can collect the insurance, they can pay off the mob, and they can ride off into the sunset, right? When you can't pay your bills, and it has struck me, there's no chance that the West has to pay off its unfunded liabilities. Like, there's so many multiple times bigger than the entire economy of the West. I mean, we're not just talking Illinois, we're not Chicago, we're not, we're not talking California or even Ontario. I mean, the province I live in, it's a 5 times per capita debt larger than California, which is called California or the left coast or Mad Hatter with a suntan. And there's no, like, you can't pay it off. Now, the traditional answer that governments have when they can't pay off what they owe the population is to start a war.
Right.
Like, because you start a war and people are willing to accept sacrifices if there's a war on. So in times of peacetime, if you go, I don't know, let's say you go to people who are either receiving or about to receive old age pensions, and you say, sorry, folks, funny story. You voted for all this free stuff, but you didn't really vote to pay for it now, did you? So there's really nothing here, and we can't keep preying on the young because they're already burdened down with student debts that lead them to nowhere but a Starbucks job and a lifetime of writing bitter, angsty, anarchist poetry about the powers that be, mistaking the government for the free market at all times. we don't really have enough money for you, so sorry, we're going to have to cut your pension significantly, and you're going to have to double up, and you're going to have to find some way to get by. Well, if you try that, of course, everyone's going to go mental, because they're not in a fight or flight state where they're willing to accept the concept of sacrifice. Now, in a war, I mean, people will accept rationing, like little food stamps. They'll accept like getting 1 stick of butter a week. The women will accept not having stockings, which if you've ever seen British women's legs, stockings not always the worst idea in the world, or at least when I was a kid. Hey, let's put some fog over those varicose veins a little, shall we? So people will accept privations. They will accept reduced standard of living. They will accept when their fight or flight mechanism gets activated, then they will accept privations. They won't otherwise. And there is this general snowball with regards to immigration in the West. And it's all founded on one basic idea that everyone's interchangeable, right? That someone, what is the difference if someone comes from Yemen or Somalia or Papua New Guinea, or like, what's the difference? If you think there's any difference, it must be racist, right? I mean, this is
thousands of years of divergent evolution. That's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's, different brain volumes, different number of spinal columns, different histories, different cultures, different methodologies for dealing with gender, different concepts of the state, different religions. I mean, you name it. That you don't have to be racist to notice that some fruits are different from other fruits, right?
No, it's absolutely right.
Right. So for the politicians to restrict immigration, they would have to say, basically they would have to say in England, they would have to say, well, we prefer the people who are here to the people who could be here. And that is going to make the press go mental, because the press is going to start screaming racism. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard this. You probably have. It was in the 60s. Enoch Powell, British politician, had a speech called Rivers of Blood, which is well worth looking up and reading through about how he thought this third world migration was going to end up. And let's just say it's worth reading. But of course, even back in the 60s, he was decried as a racist and so on. And so now things have become even more hysterical in that regard. Plus, of course, you have a massive voting bloc of people who want their own countrymen to keep coming in. If you've just come in from Pakistan, you want people from Pakistan, your relatives, your friends, your childhood friends, all the people you grew up in. Come on over, right? It's great here. Oh, lots of free welfare, free healthcare, best stuff in the world, right? The fact that they're burdening and cracking the system is another matter. So you have a huge voting bloc that you didn't have before, and you have even more hysteria regarding racism than you did in the past. So what politician is going to really want to have anything to do with that, right?
Right. That's a very important thing you bring up, how the different ethnic groups that are coming into the West maintain their own ethnic identities, and they don't assimilate to the Western nations that they're inhabiting.
And why should they? No, seriously,
well, they should.
Why
it's not in their
they?
best interest to do so.
Why should they? I mean, they're being paid to not assimilate. That's the whole point of welfare.
Exactly.
The whole point of welfare is you don't have to learn English. You don't have to adapt to local customs. You don't have to adapt to local work environments. I mean, can you imagine if some horrible... Let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, Jordan, that there's someone in the third world who's sexist. Doesn't want to work for a woman, right? So they come to England, and then they have a female boss. They mouth off to that female boss, and what happens?
Well, they get fired in the West.
Yeah, they get fired. And then they go in with their resume saying, well, I worked for 14 days at this place until I called my female manager some unholy word, and she fired me. And then the new bosses are going to be like, no, we got women working here. That's not going to work out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he got no job. What's he going to do then? Well, he's going to do what a third of the people who moved to America in the 19th century, they're going to move back home because he didn't assimilate. He didn't learn the local customs. I mean, you can't move to some new place and not assimilate unless you're independently wealthy. And as you and I both know, a lot of the people coming into the West from the third world, not exactly the poster childs of independent wealth. So they're being paid to not integrate. Now, integration takes a long time anyway. Like if you look at Chinatown or whatever, when in the States, right on the West Coast in particular, the people from China, they lived in Chinatown, and a lot of them never particularly learned English that well. Their kids, it was a different matter, and then their grandkids were more assimilated. But it takes 75 to 100 years to find out if the assimilation thing is working out. And that was during a time when there was no welfare state. And so in order to succeed, to grow, right, that there was a fruit called success and a punishment called you can't live here because you have no money. And that, even then, it took a long time to integrate. And that, of course, when you're talking about East Asian, Chinese and Japanese and so on, well, they got an IQ of 106 on average, they're going to do really well. The welfare state holds very little appeal to people of a high IQ because it's going to trap you in a low-rent occupation or a low-rent situation. And you can earn much more going out into the free market and getting a job. But if you've got an IQ of 80 or 85, the welfare state is the very best deal for you on the planet. There's no possible incentive for you to want to leave the welfare state, to go out into the free market, to learn a cultural mores that you may find abhorrent, to learn a language you find particularly complicated. You won't do better. Like you won't even come close to doing as well as the kind of income you're getting on the welfare state. So it's like they're building sections of another country, they're putting a big wall around it, and they're throwing money and resources into it, and then they're saying, gosh, I wonder why people aren't integrating. Plus, of course, there's interviews with people from the third world saying, we don't want to integrate. Integration, that's your idea. It's not our idea. We don't want to integrate at all. We love our values. We love where we came from. It's not that.
Yeah,
they're openly telling you they don't want to integrate a lot of people. So
you've got examples of ethnic groups then who have maintained their own ethnic identity after hundreds or thousands of years of not having a state of their own. They've permanently inhabited other people's nations and maintained a very strong ethnic identity. For example, you have the Jews, the most obvious example here.
6,000 years, not even a country, managed to maintain their cultural and religious identity in a very strong fashion. Now, the Jews are also facing problems with integration because, significant portions of Jewish women are marrying non-Jews, and that is becoming a problem. But yeah, thousands. It's funny because, of course, there are Jews out there who are preaching multiculturalism and integration and so on. It's like, have you looked in the mirror lately? Not so much with the integration.
Yeah, they're having a lot of the same problems that the rest of the West is having in general. But a lot of the main thing I'm calling up to address is whether, I know economically there's no incentive for these foreigners coming into the West to integrate themselves into Western society, but more I wanted to focus on the social and ideological differences, because in a lot of the examples that I've looked up historically, and there's hundreds and hundreds of historical examples of countries facing balkanization or worse, one group being completely removed by whatever means that entails by another group over either religious differences or ethnic differences. And people just end up resenting each other over more social and identitarian differences that they have rather than economic ones.
Religious differences. Let's just fundamentally we're talking about religious differences. That's the major source of contention with these kinds of things. And communists or leftists. So, I should say. So the question is, how did the West sort out the problem of religious differences? Well, separation of church and state. Because when there was a state religion, then every single religion, as you know, would try and get hold of state power to impose or enforce its version of religiosity on everyone else. And if they couldn't stand aside from that battle, they had to try, because if they didn't, then some other group would get it and their religion would be hunted or extinguished or driven out or whatever it was, right? So the problem of religious warfare, which plagued Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years, resulting in millions of deaths, the problem was solved by saying, okay, everybody back to your corners. The government will not legislate religion. And then everyone was like, okay, I'm willing to give that up if everyone else is willing to give that up. I'm willing to have a separation of church and state, as long as no one's trying to weasel in through the back door and impose their religion through the state in some nefarious manner. So when it comes to how we live together, the only example I think that really matters, that really works, is freedom of religion. We need freedom of culture. What that means is a separation of culture and the state. It means a separation of religion and the state. It means a separation of race or ethnicity and the state, which means you need truly colorblind laws. You need laws that will not favor one group over another. You need no welfare state. You need, all of the economic freedoms that you can imagine. Then the productive people will all work together. The unproductive people will probably leave in the long run. And there may be self-segregation into communities. And this is not due to racism. It's due to the fact that people are bloody busy. You got a job, you're raising kids, you got your bills to pay, you got your house to maintain. I mean, you're busy. You don't have time to learn 12 different languages because there's 12 different languages in your neighborhood. You don't have time to learn 12 different cultures and what people like and don't like and find offensive and don't find offensive. And you don't have time to figure out everyone's religious preferences. It's just easier to deal with people like yourself. And the only people who love diversity tend to be the young who've got lots of time on their hands and love, frankly, banging people from exotic cultures. You've got people
that have been through government schooling programs.
Well, yes, but it's one thing to go through government schooling programs. It's another thing to try and actually raise your children in a highly diverse environment where you're worried. Everyone's got different religious views, so you're worried about your kid. Maybe your Zoroastrian household, and across a Buddhist, and then down the road is a Muslim or two, and over here are some Christians, and there's some atheists. And if your kids all mixed together, how long's your religion going to last? Because they're all going to be talking about their own particular things. And they're going to come back with questions and say, well, Bobby does it this way, and Ahmed does it this way, and Naira does it this way, and I mean, it's not going to hold together.
I haven't read it myself, but I've seen it referenced in some of the research that I've done preparing for this. Are you familiar with the Bowling Alone studies?
Oh, yeah, Putnam was his name, right?
Yes, suggested that the results that he found were that positive social outcomes were or rather, I'm getting that backwards. Homogeneity in a community was associated with almost exclusively positive social outcomes.
Sure.
So I can see that people
diversity,
might like to...
Yeah, diversity is like a neutron bomb. Or I guess it's like the democratic control or the leftist control of a city. The buildings are standing, but nobody goes outside. Everyone cocoons in. So diversity is great for people who make movies and television and video games, because nobody goes out. You know what the great competitor is to corporations that want you sitting on a couch? It's the great outdoors. So I think one of the reasons why the media loves pushing diversity is that diversity means that your neighborhood falls apart. You can't go outside, so you sit home and watch TV.
But as you mentioned, that if we had a state where we had laws that were entirely founded upon universal principles, we had separation of church and state, we avoided letting culture influence our political policies, etc., then we may be able to live in a diverse society. But that is a hypothetical. What we have right now is the polar opposite of that. We do have governments currently who are passing policies that do benefit certain groups more than they benefit others.
Well, and third world immigrants overwhelmingly vote for the left, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got imams in England, as you know, saying that the Muslims who don't vote Labour are going to hell. Yeah, that's exactly how democracy was supposed to function. Good job, everyone.
Yeah, we know statistically immigrants overwhelmingly vote for the left. But realistically, I want to talk about, from our current standpoint, do you think that we can realistically move towards a society that's more founded upon liberty and universal principles from where we are now?
Oh, no, that's going to happen no matter what. I mean, that's going to happen no matter what, because the welfare state is going to break.
Would it require a collapse of our current system?
I mean, I don't know. What's it like for you, Jordan, talking to people about this stuff? Are they open to it, or they just close their eyes, put their fingers in their ears, stick their asses in the air, stick their ostrich heads in the sand and go, la, 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 I can't hear you?
I would 100% lose my job if I spoke to this about anyone, anyone in the UK, and anyone found out about it.
Right.
And I got to watch my
people,
words.
if people won't listen to reason, then they're going to have to listen to bitter experience. That's just the way the world works. An addict either finds a way to curb his addiction, or he dies, or he ends up broke, or he ends up in prison. I mean, you either learn from reason and evidence, or you're going to have to learn from bitter experience. People don't even want to talk about it. Well, I shouldn't say that. People do want to talk about it. I mean, the majority of people in Europe want an end to Muslim immigration. That's something that needs to be talked about. And the problem is the media won't let anyone talk about it. Well, and the police, who seem to be entirely keen on well, it's a lot more fun to police people typing mean things on Facebook than it is to go into a no-go zone and try and arrest someone, right? I mean, I understand what the police are doing. I mean, it's a lot more fun to kick down someone's door if you know they're not going to fight back, right? So
exactly. The people typing on Facebook aren't going to fight back. If you tried to go into one of the many Muslim no-go zones and arrest someone, then they'll riot.
Well, did you see? There was a GIF recently that was floating around on, I think it was just this last week, about a bunch of migrants chasing a bunch of British policemen who were sprinting, hot-footing it down the street in full retreat. I mean, So I mean, what was it? Just over last weekend, 13,500 migrants from North Africa or from Africa come to Italy. You can't sustain that. You can't sustain it. So the welfare state, I mean, government's going to run out of money even faster. The migrant crisis is going to accelerate the destruction of the socialist redistribution system known as sort of modern democracy. I mean, it's going to take it out. But then
what's going to happen after that? Is we are getting a huge amount of resentment towards the groups in society who we perceive, whether it's accurate or not to reality, the groups that we perceive to be the cause of these negative social changes that we're experiencing. People have a huge amount of resentment towards those groups.
Well, that's
Tommy
that pisses me
Robinson.
off.
I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Tommy
Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
The
Of
Rebel
course. No, he's
Media.
been on the show. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jordan. This pisses me off. Blaming the migrants is stupid. Come on. You have a giant welfare state and no borders.
I don't blame the migrants at all. I think they're
doing exactly what you would do in their situation.
I would. I absolutely would.
Of course you would. Well, I might be a burden on the taxpayers. And come on. I mean, if you leave huge piles of gold out on the front yard and say, we've gone on vacation for a month, and you come back and some of your gold is gone. Oh, my goodness, those terrible thieves. Okay, maybe what they're doing is wrong, but come on. It's not the fault of the migrants. It's not the fault of the immigrant groups. They're doing exactly what any sane, rational actor would do in their situation. The problem is people have not wanted to talk about the danger and destructiveness of the welfare state, which has now been known for well on 50 years. People have not wanted to take that topic on. The politicians aren't going to take it on. Of course not, because they need a groundswell of opposition to the welfare state before they're even willing to tackle the topic. And so you need people who are going to talk about the welfare state, who are going to talk about the destructiveness of social engineering, who are going to talk about the eugenics of the welfare state, where you're taking money from smart people and giving it to less smart people to have more babies. I mean, it's immoral. It's a violation of property rights. It's a violation of what Europe and the West have stood for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is a new aristocracy with the bottom at the top. And so the fact is that the West got greedy, women got kind of crazy with their vote and wanted to vote away all the consequences to bad decisions. And so now this is one of the final symptoms. The migrant crisis is a symptom of the self-betrayal of thou shalt not steal the West has been gorging itself on for the past 50 years. And the wages of sin are problems. If you indulge in a sin, if you indulge in immoral behavior, if you're a drug addict, if you're a food addict, if you're a sex addict or a gambling addict, yes, it is going to harm you. But it's like the gambling addict who blows all of his money, and then the bank comes and repossesses his home because he can't pay his mortgage, and he says, the problem is the bank. No, the bank is the symptom. The migrants are a symptom of your failure in the West to deal with the immorality of the welfare state that has been pointed out since the last couple of hundred years. One of the first things that happened, and it's been done before. I did a whole Peter Schiff show on this years ago about Speenham Land, which you should look up, Speenhamland. Speenham Land It's been done millions of times before. That's the entire example of the goddamn Roman Empire and the welfare state and how it falls down. This has been well known for thousands of years, and Europe just said, well, we'll get it right this time. This socialism, this redistribution, this destruction of the family, this letting the government control the vast movement of trillions of pounds in society, we got it. Never worked before, destroyed entire cultures and civilizations before, but we can taste of this fruit and it'll be just fine. We got this one. We got no problems with it. Magic has happened and we can suddenly have massive amounts of money going through the hands of very few people. They're never going to use it to buy votes. They're never going to be corrupted by that power. People are never going to get dependent on that money. Families won't be destroyed. Neighborhoods won't be destroyed. All of the things that were easily and ably predicted in 1957 by Atlas Shrugged, not to mention the Moynihan Report, not to mention Enoch Powell, not to mention all the people who've been demonized, Joseph McCarthy among them. This redistribution, this socialization of wealth, it was a deal with the devil. Everybody had been told that it was going to be a bad idea, and everybody went for it anyway and has refused to talk about it since. And then they say, well, the problem is the migrants. No.
Well, a lot of the resentment of the migrants obviously comes from the individual actions of the migrants once they're in the country. Of course, it's the government's fault for creating the circumstances under which the migrants can come here in the first place. But, when you have something like Rotherham in the UK, where you have 1,500 girls molested over a period of several years, for example.
More than molested. Doused in gasoline, threatened with weapons, passed around, raped into near atomic oblivion. I mean, it's the most unholy pedophile sex slave ring that can be conceived of. And I just wanted to sort of point that out. I mean, it's a very mild term that you're using, even though it's a horrifying
very weak
term.
Language, yeah. I'm used to having to sort of self-censor being a British citizen, but that sort of thing going on creates the resentment between the population groups in a country. And I do agree with you that eventually Western nations will start to collapse, but that resentment's already there, and it's only going to get worse as we go further towards
but this
this.
It's
like panic situation.
No, but you're taking away everyone's agency. Look. Racial IQ differences have been known for hundreds of years. I mean, it wasn't called IQ in the past. I mean, the IQ test is about 100 years old, give or take, right? Racial IQ differences have been known for a long time. Incompatibilities between certain ideologies have been known for a long time. So here's the problem. This is empowering to everyone in the West. Stop blaming other people. Stop blaming your politicians. Stop blaming the media. It's you. You're the problem. When people bring up uncomfortable topics, do you scream that they're racist? Do you scream that they're phobic? Do you scream all of this crap at them and shut them down? What about when the media goes and attacks people? When the media goes and attacks people for speaking the truth, do you continue to buy that media? Do you continue to tune in? Do you continue to consume the ads? Now, I know in England there's the BBC, which is this fascist, Stalinist kind of forced, literally fascist, right? I mean, it's a publicly owned propaganda arm. And so in England, there's a challenge with regards to that, and that's not the only place in Europe where that happens. But trust me, there's a lot of private or semi-private media outlets that are still eagerly consumed by the British people, even though those media outlets are putting out the most abominable and abhorrent trash imaginable. So do you encourage, are you curious, do you look things up, do you allow for the exercise of the free speech rights that you still have to some degree in the West, I mean, particularly, of course, in America? Do you continue to buy and consume media that is harmful to any kind of productive conversation about these challenges? Do you encourage people to look these things up? Are you open, or do you shut your mouth for fear of disapproval? Do you continue to fund the media that is promoting all these lies and falsehoods? It's you. This looking at other people and, these giant power structures and all that. No. Do you send your kids off to uni? Do you send your kids off to university so they can be propagandized into leftist, self-destructive androids? Well, if you do, it's not the government. It's not the media. It's not the universities. It's not the politicians. It's you. Who do you vote for? What do you promote? What stand do you take? I'm not saying go get yourself fired. But it's up to every single individual to look in the mirror and say, what can I do? I don't have to be self-destructive, but there's still so many things that you can do that aren't self-destructive. There's still so many things that you can talk about that aren't going to get you in trouble. Of course, you don't want to be the guy who taught his dog to do a Hitler salute, but there's still so much that you can do in private conversation. There's still so much information you can bring to bear with people. And if no one's willing to do that, you know, it's an old thing that the late Nathaniel Brandon used to say. He used to say to the people who would complain about their lives, oh, my life's not getting better, I got all these problems, this, that, and the other. He would say, the essence of what I want to tell you is this. No one is coming. No one is coming to save you. No one is coming to make things better. No one is coming to turn things around. It's up to you and only you. Because the moment you think someone else is going to solve the problem, and everyone thinks that, the problem will never get solved. You must take action. Inspire other people through your action and do it. I'm not going to do it. Tommy Robinson's not going to do it. Nigel Farage, okay, maybe. He's going to get close. Nobody can do it. I mean, Donald Trump, he's just one guy. He can't do it. He needs the support of millions and millions of people, and everyone has their part to play. Can you look in the mirror and say, you know what? The welfare state was a terrible, terrible idea, and it's really endangering Western civilization, just as it brought down the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was swept in and overtaken by people from outside its borders. Oh, it's all so repetitive for words, right? And so this idea, well, but the media and the politicians and this and the that and the other, it's like, come on. If and not you, but if people feel that passive, then don't even get out of bed. Don't bother fighting, because you're going to lose. You have to act in some manner, and there's still more scope and less courage that is required to act now to save your culture and your civilization that's ever been asked of any group before in history. This is not the First World War. You're not being dragged into a trench and having to rub goose fat on your frozen feet so the toes don't snap off like the ends of a popsicle in a car door. You're not being asked to walk into withering German machine gun fire. You're not being bombed by the Luftwaffe with searchlights stabbing up like ghostly fingers to Hitler in the sky. I mean, you have to have some difficult conversations. You have to look into your heart. You have to be courageous, still in language only.
We knew who the enemy was, right?
I'm telling you who the enemy is. The enemy is people in the West's avoidance of the basic reality of what has been told to them over and over and over again. Welfare state is a bad idea. It's a violation of property rights. And races and ethnicities are different, and we don't know how to bridge that gap as yet. This is all facts. It's all basically empirically proven, right?
Yeah.
So the enemy is whoever doesn't want to talk about this stuff. And listen, I know England. One thing you fuckers are great at is shaming the living shit out of people. There's no... Okay, maybe a constipated, highly angry, potentially sumo wrestling Japanese father has a greater and more contemptuous sneer than your average British person, particularly the upper-class toughs. Oh, you're so pathetic, you know, like that contempt that British people can pour upon those who step out of line. How about using that contempt for good? And how about...
Okay, Stefan Molyneux, you can check out the rest of that. The end of diversity, prepare yourself accordingly. And the thing is, this is something that the Western governments have no real interest in stopping. Let's say even Trump has an interest in stopping it. There's plenty of people behind the scene that they're not going to allow it to stop. You could build a wall. They're just going to, have buses going through the wall now. The welfare state, I actually have quite a few articles here. As long as they load up right. Problem is you got all these that reload and don't want to allow one to... Okay, Forbes.com, welfare state doesn't adequately describe how much America's poor control your wallet. So let's just get into the welfare state part. it says here many people choose to become Democrats when they are young because of humane belief that government policies in America are stingy in providing, or stingy in providing resources to the poor. William Boegley fingered the attitude in his book, Never Enough, America is a Limitless Welfare State. No matter how large the welfare state, liberal politicians and writers have accused it of being shamefully small and contemptibly austere. Barbara Enrich expressed the same attitude in her book, Nickel and Dime. Guilt doesn't go away, or doesn't go anywhere near far enough. The appropriate emotion is shame regarding the stingy miserlessness of America's welfare state. Once such a decision is made, habits are formed, and many continue to vote reflexively Democrat, regardless of facts on the ground. As people start busy careers and take on family responsibilities, basic assumptions are never questioned. The effects of policies are never considered. Identification with their team becomes hardened, and it is easy to burrow into like-minded media cocoons where contrary facts and probing questions are never aired or printed. The welfare empire, but the term welfare state does not begin to encompass the totality of America's commitment of resources to aid the poor. It is more like a vast empire bigger than the entire budgets of almost every other country in the world. America's welfare empire encompasses close to 200 or more federal state programs, including 23 low-income health programs, 27 low-income housing programs, 30 employment and training programs, 34 social services programs, and at least 13 food and nutrition programs, and 24 low-income child care programs, among others. Federal and state governments spend $1 trillion a year just on these tested welfare programs, which does not include social and Medicare. This is more than we spend on national defense. It adds up to roughly $17,000 per person in poverty and over $50,000 for a poor family of 3. The Census Bureau estimates that our current welfare spending totals 4 times what would be necessary to give all the poor the cash to bring them up to the poverty line. Eliminating All Poverty in America, a recent book by Charles Murray, in these hands furthermore documents that. The war on poverty famously began in 1965. From 1965 to 2008, the total spent only on means-tested welfare for the poor in 2008 dollars has been nearly $16 trillion, according to a Heritage Foundation study. That has been more than twice all spending on all military conflicts from the American Revolution to today. Helping or hurting our poor. And I'll stop once I get through part of this to kind of go into segue into another part of what was being talked in that Stefan Molyneux video. Helping or hurting the poor, what we have gotten for all of the welfare spending. Poverty fell sharply after the Depression. Before the war on poverty, the poverty rate fell from 32 in 1950 to 22.4 in 59 to 12.1 in 69. Soon after the war on poverty programs became effective, progress against poverty as measured by the poverty rate then abruptly stopped. By 2009, the U.S. poverty rate had risen back to 14.3%, and today is further soared to 16.1%, substantially higher than when the war on poverty began. In other words, we fought the war on poverty, and poverty won. One major reason that poverty stopped declining after the war on poverty started is that the poor and lower income population stopped working. In 1960, nearly 2/3 of households in the lowest income, 1/5 of the population, were headed by persons who worked. But by 91, this work effort had declined by about 50%, with only 1/3 of household heads in the bottom 20% in income working, and only 11% working full-time year-round. Along with this collapse of work, the war on poverty was also associated with the breakup of lower-income families and soaring out of wedlock births. Prior to the war on poverty, black families remained intact, and the overwhelming majority of black babies were born to two-parent families. But coinciding with the war on poverty, the black out-of-wedlock birth rate soared from 28% in 65 to 49 in 75. So basically almost, doubled to 65% in 1990 to 70% in 95, where it remains today. This effect has not been limited to blacks. Among whites, out-of-wedlock births soared from 4% in 65 to 11% in 80, 21% in 90, and 25% in 95. Excuse me. Where it also remains today. Among the white high school dropouts, the out-of-wedlock births rate is 48%. Among Americans overall, out-of-wedlock births soared from 7% when the war on poverty began to 39% today. Non-work and having children outside of marriage are the two main causes of poverty in America today. Indeed, full-time work year-round at the current minimum wage plus the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit would be enough to lift every American family out of poverty, yet the typical poor family with children today is supported by only 800 hours of work during a year, or 16 hours per week. Okay, now let's kind of get into that. Now we have basically a welfare state that has not given a reason for anybody to come out of poverty. And then something that Stefan Molyneux brought out, now when you combine that with the immigration, with populations that are only taking advantage of their opportunity to get out of their country that's being bombed, plus you do too have the potential for terrorists to sneak in with the people trying to escape the war zone. But they are given reasons not to have to assimilate, not have to learn to, make it in the countries that they're arriving in. What they're being given is welfare, which allows them to disconnect and not be a part of the culture in the country that they go. Remember, these people are not going, I want to go to, Great Britain because I think that's a great country. I like how they run things, that's not what's happening. They're going, hey, we're being bombed. These countries' borders are open. They'll give us free stuff. And I don't like it, But as long as I got a roof over my head and my family's head, and they're going to pay for everything, they're going to give us free food, all this, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm taking my family. And by getting all the free stuff, they've created communities that are not like the country that those communities are in. And these are also a lot of times referred to no-go zones because they are now policing their own communities in a culture that does not reflect that or the laws or the freedoms of that country and the people. We've seen those instances where, a young woman is ran down by a father because that young girl is trying to assimilate into the culture of the country, where the father does not want that to happen. They want to hold on to their culture. They don't want to assimilate. They didn't come here to assimilate. They didn't want their daughter or sons to assimilate. They wanted to create their own society within that society that operates in a different way. And when you have a system like that, it's propped up by the welfare state. Now, do you think they're going to run to your country and try to do that without the welfare state? Oh, I guarantee you some will. Some will be like, I'm tired of this. I want to keep my religion, but I'm willing to assimilate into the cultures of that country, learn to speak their language, learn how to, act in public and, interact in public, and the laws of that country to get my family out of harm's way, to put my family in a better position. But I'm going to have to get there and work my butt off to have that. And just like if I was to move to another country, I wouldn't expect to have it easy. I am from a different country. I would expect that, I'm probably going to have to work a little bit harder than the next person just to prove that I'll do what it takes. That's something I would expect if I moved to a different country, a different culture, a different language. Because when you understand that, a lot of that's where a reform of the religion comes into play, where you can have your beliefs. My beliefs don't mean I have to sit here and enforce or take someone's rights away because they don't believe what I believe. As long as they're not hurting people, as long as they're not forcing things upon people, using force, people can have different opinions. Now, give me a second here, pull this other one up. Now, the other thing you have to remember when you look at this is now, not only are they getting this welfare state, it's coming out of your pocket. This is coming out of your pocket. So now this is costing you, as a taxpayer, all this money to pay for people to come here and not assimilate. And what we've seen in a lot of European countries where they have these no-go zones, it creates a violent interaction among different cultures, because it's literally in your backyard. But I had this from the Blaze. Overburdened courts are delaying deportations and costing taxpayers $19 billion a year. So we have a welfare state, which, goes into the trillions of dollars. And at the same time, what they're doing here, overburdened courts are delaying deportations and costing taxpayers $19 billion a year. It says here, Immigration Customs Enforcement report arrests of illegal immigrants increased in June, while the number of deportations remain low due to court delays. The reason for low deportation numbers is owed to massive backlog in federal immigration courts, a shortage of immigration judges, and a lengthy due process. The think tank panel discussed what the cost is to American taxpayers and why the low deportation numbers might not be such a bad thing. Quote, just a reminder that for every arrest, that's an individual that the U.S. is paying for specifically, said Nick Pitts of the Denison Forum, and quote, and right now the Migration Policy Institute estimates that we spend about $19 billion a year on immigration services, unquote. To help courts ease this process, Attorney General, look who name popped up again. General Jeff Sessions will add more immigration judges to benches along the southwest Mexico border this year and more next year. In addition, we will put 50 more immigration judges on the bench this year and 75 next year. We can no longer afford to wait 18 to 24 months to get these new judges on the bench. So today I have implemented a new streamlined hiring plan. It requires just as much vetting as before, but reduces the timeline, reflecting the dire need to reduce the backlogs in our immigration courts, he said in a statement released by the Department of Justice. To see more, and that was from theblaze.com, and I had one more from theblaze.com I want to hurry up and cover. So now we have radically different cultures, and one, has called this home for a long time. The other one is new. And again, I also mentioned that terrorists are coming along with these immigrants without real proper vetting. They're allowing as many in as possible, so it allows for this. The person asking questions, Stefan Molyneux, believed that, this was to increase the police state, and I really think that no matter if they're trying to use it for that or not, that's what will happen. I have the other article here from the Blaze. Merkel refuses to cap refugees coming to Germany despite increase in migrant crime. And this is another thing about a lot of the culture differences, where they're coming from a very, should I say, that their true culture, I think, there's probably a lot of good in it. But they're also coming from a very radical culture, in the sense that radicals have been, running a lot of this. And then, of course, if you got the people that side with the radicals, they're agreeing with a lot of this. And this comes to, child marriages, rapes, and, all of this. And that part of that culture is making it into those European countries where they are having to deal with, a lot of the rapes, which in their own communities, it's not even going to get ever reported, because they're policing their own communities under Sharia law. So the cases are coming from when that culture starts trying to interact with the other culture in inappropriate ways. And for safe base of the immigration policies that they are pushing, they choose not to do too much about it. Says here, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Sunday that limiting the flow of refugees into Germany from Middle Eastern and North African countries will not happen during an annual interview broadcast on Germany's ARD. As far as an upper limit is concerned, my position is clear. I will not accept it, she said during an interview. According to Germany's Dutch Well, Merkel, who leads the Christian Democratic Union, has taken this stance in opposition to the more conservative Christian Social Union. Merkel needs the support of the CSU to win the upcoming September election. The cap is and remains a goal of the CSU, Seehofer said. CSU leader Horst Seehofer previously stated that he would not enter into a coalition with Merkel and the CDU unless a 200,000 limit to refugees is put in place. However, CNN reported that he has since softened on this issue and refused to make immigration limits a deal breaker. During her interview, Merkel highlighted the common ground that the CDU and the CSU, with the CSU saying both want to fight the causes of migration. And I believe we will achieve what we want and without any kind of cap, Merkel said. According to DW, opinion polls indicate Merkel will win her re-election in September. Migrant crime with Germany has gotten its fair share of media attention for its out-of-control growth. It has also earned the era of President Donald Trump, who called Merkel's migration policy catastrophic in March, according to the Mirror. According to Express, refugees committed more than 200,000 crimes in 2015, increasing crime committed by refugees by 79% from 2014. In 2016, the Telegraph reported that from 2015 to 2016, migrant crime rose by another 50%. And that was from theblaze.com. Now, I've been pretty vocal that I don't think that we shouldn't want people to come to the country, but I think we should want people that want to come because of our culture, because of our laws, because of our beliefs. Hopefully, they've read the Constitution and that the Bill of Rights, and they might look at that and go, that's what we need. So when they come here, we have more on our side of freedom. From whatever religion, race they come from, that they read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and to see that there should always be a fight for liberty and freedom. And that doesn't mean that you can just run roughshod on, whoever. It means that you get to choose your lifestyle. You get to choose your career. You get to choose who you help out and who you don't. Taxation is theft. You get to make these choices, but you don't have the right to abridge other people's right to make their own choices on these matters. That's what liberty, that's what freedom is. And when we have people that aren't being lured in by a welfare state and ran out by bombs by the same countries, that just creates a a very bad situation. Okay, we are coming up towards the end of the broadcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and stay tuned here on UCY.TV for all the great broadcasts coming up. And don't forget, go check out UCY.TV. Scroll down to the bottom, click the Amazon button, and you can shop Amazon through UCY.TV, getting the same great prices, same great shipping rate, and at the same time, a little kickback goes back to the network to help cover operating costs. So stay tuned, and don't forget, if you're into prepping, My Patriot Supply has great non-GMO seeds. Check them out. And if you want to go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot, you can go there. And again, same great prices, same great shipping rate. And Anti-Tyranny News gets a little kickback, and that helps cover our operating costs on our end. My Patriot Supplies products that I use, I love their seed vaults. They got just regular herbal seeds and medicinal herbal seed vaults, along with, full crisis garden seed vaults, all non-GMO and certified. And they also have food supplies now, too, that are really a big hit out there. 72, multiple year. Check them out. And again, stay tuned here on UCY.TV. And I'm going to let the little bit of this clip here play.
Someone holding up one of those pitiful, shitty excuses for newspapers called British tabloids. You say, did you give those people a fucking penny? Get the fuck out of my house. People are tuned into some shitty TV show that's programming and broadcasting all this propaganda. Say, I know you're forced to pay for it. Nobody's forcing you to watch it. Turn that shit off. Or get out of my house. You need to start exercising social ostracism. It's peaceful. It's voluntary. It's perfectly moral. In fact, I would say it's positively moral. And if you're not willing to do that, well, then you're like someone who's like standing on the train tracks. And I guess like that old painting of the horse thundering towards the train, you're just standing there. Train's coming. What do you have to do? Lift your fucking foot, step off the tracks. And look, you've survived. But if you don't want to lift your foot off the tracks and step off, well, I guess the train is going to wear a new bloodied nose called "This is where the West used to be."
So, shall I take from that to bring it back to my original question, that you do believe that liberty can still be realistically achieved without first, restoring homogeneity? That is more of a what I saw as a possible result.
Restoring homogeneity is the rivers of blood. You know that, right? Come on. I mean,
more or less.
Homogeneity sounds real nice.
There has been peaceful balkanizations in the past, but they're rare. Most of the time it is a war.
Right. It is. No, that is an extraordinarily violent thing that I hope never, ever comes to pass.
But is it not? It seems, I know you've told me now there's ways that it can be avoided, but it seems sort of inevitable that when the government, who is restraining people at the moment, finally steps out of the way, the people are going to kill each other.
Aussie Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.